The October rain drummed relentlessly against the tall windows of Maple Grove Funeral Home in suburban Cleveland, Ohio, creating a steady rhythm that seemed to match the heavy beating of my heart. I stood beside my mother's mahogany casket, its polished surface reflecting the soft glow of the overhead lights, watching a steady stream of visitors file past with their whispered condolences and gentle touches to my shoulder. The overwhelming scent of white lilies hung heavy in the air, mixing with the faint smell of old wood polish and industrial carpet cleaner that seemed to permeate every funeral home I'd ever been in. My sister Sarah stood directly across from me, positioned like a mirror image, her black designer dress pristine and unwrinkled, her makeup applied with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to everything in her life, despite the tears she'd been shedding intermittently all morning. The viewing room was filled with the quiet murmur of conversations, the soft rustle of tissues being pulled from boxes, and the occasional muffled sob from someone who had been particularly close to Mom. I recognized most of the faces, longtime clients from Chen's Kitchen, neighbors from Elmwood Avenue, members of St. Mary's Catholic Church where Mom had been a faithful parishioner for over 30 years, and colleagues from her real estate days who still remembered her fondly despite her career change. "She looks so peaceful," Mrs. Henderson from next door whispered to me, her weathered hand squeezing mine with surprising strength. At 82, she moved slowly, but still maintained the sharp mind and caring heart that had made her such a wonderful neighbor to our family for over 2 decades. Margaret was such a wonderful woman, always helping others, always so incredibly organized about everything in her life. I remember when your father passed. She had every detail of his funeral, planned and executed flawlessly, even while dealing with her own grief. That word, organized, struck me like a lightning bolt and stuck firmly in my mind, refusing to let go. Mrs. Henderson was absolutely right. Mom had been obsessively organized about literally everything in her life. She'd kept meticulous, color-coded records of her finances going back 15 years, had carefully labeled photo albums dating back to the 1970s, with detailed captions describing every person and event, and had even pre-planned her own funeral down to the specific flower arrangements and the hymns she wanted sung during the service. The funeral director had commented on how rare it was to work with someone who had left such detailed instructions for their own memorial service. It simply didn't make logical sense that a woman this methodical, this forward-thinking, this concerned about details, wouldn't have prepared a comprehensive will. After the emotionally draining service, which included beautiful eulogies from Father Martinez and 3 of Mom's closest friends, Sarah and I found ourselves sitting alone in Mom's familiar kitchen, the same warm, inviting space where we'd eaten countless bowls of Lucky Charms cereal before catching the school bus, where Mom had patiently taught us to make her famous apple pie with its perfectly flaky crust and secret blend of spices, where just 6 months ago she'd been energetically bustling around preparing her traditional Sunday dinner for the entire extended family, complete with her legendary pot roast and homemade dinner rolls. The kitchen had always been the heart of our family home, the place where important conversations happened, where homework was completed at the worn wooden table, where celebrations were planned and sorrows were shared. Now the space felt eerily hollow and lifeless, like a movie set after filming had wrapped and all the actors had gone home. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the steady tick of the wall clock that had hung above the stove for as long as I could remember, and the occasional creak of the old house settling around us. Even the familiar smells seemed muted. The lingering scent of Mom's favorite lavender cleaning products, the faint aroma of coffee that had been brewed in this kitchen every morning for decades, the subtle fragrance of the herbs growing in small pots on the windowsill that Mom had tended with such care. "We need to talk about what happens next," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. She'd always been the practical one, the older sister who took charge. At 35, she was 3 years older than me, and she'd never let me forget it. With the house, the business, everything. I looked around the kitchen, taking in the cherry wood cabinets Mom had saved for years to afford, the little herb garden visible through the window that she'd tended every morning, the refrigerator covered in photos of her grandchildren, Sarah's, 2 kids, and my daughter Emma. Did you find a will? I asked, though something in Sarah's expression already told me the answer. She shook her head slowly. I've looked everywhere, Jake. Mom's desk, her bedroom, even that old filing cabinet in the basement. There's nothing. No will, no legal documents except the deed to the house and the business paperwork. That's impossible, I said, leaning back in the wooden chair that creaked under my weight. Mom planned everything. She had her funeral arranged, her insurance policies organized, her medical directives all set up. She wouldn't have left this to chance. Sarah's eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite identify. Maybe she thought she had more time. Maybe she kept putting it off. People do that, you know. They think they'll live forever. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire conversation. Margaret Chen had been a successful real estate agent for over 20 years before she'd made the decision to start the family catering business, Chen's Kitchen, 8 years ago when she turned 55. During her real estate career, she'd witnessed countless family disputes over inheritance issues, had seen brothers and sisters torn apart by disagreements over property and money, had watched adult children become bitter enemies over their parents' estates. She'd actually told me once, during one of our regular monthly dinner dates at Golden Dragon, her favorite Chinese restaurant downtown, that she'd observed too many families completely destroy themselves over inheritance disputes to ever let that happen to her own children. I just think we should approach this situation fairly and rationally, Sarah continued, reaching across the scratched wooden table to squeeze my hand in what seemed like a gesture of solidarity. Her engagement ring, a stunning 2-carat diamond solitaire that her husband Mike had bought her last Christmas after his construction business had what he'd called the best year ever, caught and reflected the light from the overhead fixture Mom had installed just 2 years ago. We split everything exactly 50-50. The house, the catering business, her savings accounts, her personal belongings. It's simple, clean, and fair to both of us. Something about the way she said those words, with such confidence and finality, made my stomach twist uncomfortably. There was an undertone in her voice that I couldn't quite identify, but it set off alarm bells in my mind. What about getting a lawyer involved, just to make sure we're doing everything legally? Why would we need lawyers? Sarah's voice took on that slightly sharp edge it got when she was annoyed. We're family. We can handle this ourselves. Mom wouldn't have wanted us spending money on legal fees when we could just work it out between us. I wanted to argue, but I was exhausted. The past 2 weeks of watching Mom deteriorate in the hospital, the funeral arrangements, the flood of casseroles and sympathy cards, it had all taken its toll. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe we were overthinking this. Okay, I said finally. But let's take some time to think about it. We don't have to make any decisions right now. Sarah smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Of course. We'll take all the time we need. 3 days later, I got a call that changed everything. I was at my apartment in downtown Cleveland, trying to focus on work. I ran a small graphic design business from home, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Jaika. Chen? The voice was professional, formal. Yes, this is Jake. This is David Park from Lakewood Real Estate. I'm calling about your mother's property on Elmwood Avenue. I understand it's going on the market soon. My blood went cold. I'm sorry, what? The listing appointment. Your sister Sarah scheduled it for tomorrow morning. She said you'd both decided to sell quickly to avoid the winter market. I sat down hard in my desk chair, my mind racing. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can you hold on a moment, please? I put the phone on mute and immediately called Sarah. It went straight to voicemail. Hi, Sarah, it's Jake. I just got a weird call from a real estate agent about listing Mom's house. Call me back as soon as you get this. I got back on the phone with Mr. Park. I'm sorry, but I think you need to speak with my sister again. We haven't made any final decisions about the property. There was a pause. Oh. Well, she seemed quite certain. She even mentioned that she'd been handling all the estate affairs since she was the executor. Executor. Sarah had never mentioned anything about being an executor. If there was no will, there wouldn't be an executor. There would be co-administrators of the estate. "I'll have my sister call you back," I said, ending the call. I tried Sarah again. Still voicemail. Then I tried her house. Mike answered on the third ring. "Hey, Jake, Sarah's not here right now. She's over at your mom's house, going through some things." Going through things? Yeah, she said something about cleaning out closets, maybe donating some clothes. You know how she is. She can't sit still when she's upset. I thanked Mike and hung up, then grabbed my keys. The drive to Mom's house in Namdsyama, Lakewood took 15 minutes, but it felt like an hour. The whole time, questions swirled through my mind. Why was Sarah talking to real estate agents without me? Why had she told them she was the executor? And what was she doing at the house alone? When I pulled into Mom's driveway, I noticed Sarah's white Honda Accord parked in front of the garage. The porch light was on, and I could see movement through the living room windows. I used my key to let myself in. "Sarah?" I called out. "In here!" Her voice came from Mom's bedroom. I found her sitting on Mom's bed, which was covered with jewelry boxes, photo albums, and various personal items. She looked up when I entered, and for just a split second, I saw something like panic in her eyes before she composed herself. "Oh, hi, Jake. I was just going through some of Mom's things. I thought we should start organizing before..." "Before what?" I interrupted. "Before you sell the house?" She blinked. "What are you talking about?" "David Park from Lakewood Real Estate called me. He said you scheduled a listing appointment for tomorrow." Sarah's face flushed slightly. "Oh, that. I was just getting some preliminary information. You know, finding out what the house might be worth, what the market's like. I wasn't actually listing it." "He said you told him you were the executor of the estate." The color drained from her face, then rushed back. "I never said that. He must have misunderstood." I looked at the items spread across the bed. "What's all this?" "Just some of Mom's jewelry and personal things. I thought we should go through it together. Decide what we want to keep, what we want to give to Emma and the kids." I picked up one of the jewelry boxes, a small wooden box with intricate carving that I remembered Mom keeping on her dresser. When I opened it, it was empty. "Where's her jewelry?" Sarah's hands fluttered nervously. "Some of it's being cleaned. Some of it wasn't worth keeping. Just costume jewelry, you know." But I did know. I knew that box had contained Mom's pearl necklace, the one her own mother had given her, the one she'd worn to every important family event for as long as I could remember. I knew there had been a diamond tennis bracelet that Dad had given her for their 20th anniversary. I knew there had been a collection of gold pieces she'd inherited from various relatives over the years. "Where's the pearl necklace?" I asked quietly. Sarah's eyes darted away from mine. "Which one?" "Mom's pearl necklace. The one from Grandma." "Oh, that old thing. The clasp was broken and the pearls were yellowing. I took it to a jeweler to see if it was worth repairing, but he said it wasn't worth the cost." I set the empty jewelry box down carefully, fighting to keep my voice level. "So you threw it away?" "I didn't throw it away. I have it somewhere safe. We can look at it later and decide what to do." But something in her tone told me she was lying. And if she was lying about the jewelry, what else was she lying about? "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. With me?" She stood up from the bed, smoothing down her sweater. "Of course. Are you absolutely certain there's no will?" The question hung in the air between us. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. A hardness I'd never seen before. "I told you, Jake. I looked everywhere. There's no will." "Then why did you tell the real estate agent you were the executor?" "I didn't. And why are you here alone?" going through Mom's things without me. Why are you talking to real estate agents without discussing it with me first? Sarah's composure finally cracked. Because someone has to take charge. Someone has to handle the practical matters while you're sitting around being sentimental about every little thing. Mom's gone, Jake. She's not coming back. And we have responsibilities now. What responsibilities? What aren't you telling me? For a moment, I thought she might tell me the truth. Her face went through a series of expressions. Anger. Fear. Something. That might have been guilt. Then she straightened her shoulders and looked me directly in the eye. I'm not telling you anything because there's nothing to tell. I'm trying to be responsible about handling Mom's affairs, and you're making it more difficult than it needs to be. I stared at her. This woman who had shared a childhood with me, who had been my maid of honor at my wedding, who had held my hand when Dad died 5 years ago, and for the first time in my life, I didn't trust her. I think we need to get a lawyer involved, I said. Sarah's face went white. That's ridiculous. We don't need lawyers. We just need to work together. Then work with me. Don't make decisions without me. Don't meet with real estate agents without me. And don't go through Mom's things without me. Fine, she said, but her voice was cold. But you're overreacting, Jake. You're letting grief cloud your judgment. Maybe I was. Maybe I was being paranoid and suspicious for no reason. But as I looked around Mom's bedroom, at the empty jewelry boxes and the way Sarah was clutching her purse like it contained something precious, I couldn't shake the feeling that my sister was hiding something important. Something that would change everything. 2 weeks after the confrontation in Mom's bedroom, I found myself wide awake at 2 a.m. on a cold Tuesday night in November, sitting at my small kitchen table in my downtown Cleveland apartment with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, staring intently at a yellow legal pad covered with my handwritten notes and an endless list of questions that kept multiplying rather than getting answered. The apartment was completely quiet, except for the occasional sound of late-night traffic on Euclid Avenue below, and the persistent hum of my elderly refrigerator that I kept meaning to replace. I'd been thinking obsessively about Mom's habits, her daily routines, her incredibly meticulous nature that had defined every aspect of her life for as long as I could remember. She'd been such a creature of habit that you could set your watch by her activities. The same breakfast every morning at exactly 7:15 a.m., 1 piece of whole wheat toast with peanut butter and a sliced banana. The same route to the grocery store. Every Thursday afternoon. The same time for her evening walk around the neighborhood each day at 6:30 p.m., rain or shine. She kept important documents in very specific, carefully organized places. Insurance papers were always filed in the top drawer of her mahogany desk. Medical records were maintained in a neat blue folder in her bedroom closet. And financial statements were meticulously organized in a gray file cabinet in the basement that she'd labeled with her precise handwriting. If she'd made a will, and I was becoming more and more convinced with each passing day that she absolutely had, where would she have kept such a crucial document? It would have been somewhere safe, somewhere logical, somewhere she could access it easily if needed, but also somewhere that would protect it from damage or loss. The next morning, I made what would turn out to be the most important phone call of this entire ordeal. I contacted Mom's longtime attorney, Robert Kellerman, whose office was located in a beautifully restored Victorian house in Cleveland Heights that had been converted into professional office space. I'd met Bob several times over the years when Mom had needed legal advice about various aspects of the catering business, contract disputes with vendors, lease negotiations for the commercial kitchen space she rented, and general business law, questions that arose as Chen's Kitchen grew from a small operation run out of her home kitchen to a thriving enterprise with a dozen regular employees. "Jake, I'm so deeply sorry for your loss," he said warmly, when his longtime secretary, Mrs. Patterson, ushered me into his comfortable, wood-paneled office that felt more like a private study in someone's home than a typical sterile law office. Bob was in his early 60s, with distinguished gray hair, and the kind of gentle, reassuring manner that immediately made you want to trust him completely. His office was filled with family photos, law books, and the subtle scent of the pipe, tobacco he occasionally smoked. Your mother was truly a remarkable woman, one of the finest people I've had the privilege to know in both my professional and personal life. Thank you so much, Mr. Kellerman. I really appreciate that, and I know Mom thought very highly of you. As well, I'm here today because I need to ask you some specific questions about Mom's estate planning and what legal documents she may have prepared. He leaned back thoughtfully in his well-worn leather chair, his expression becoming more serious and professional. I see. What exactly can I help you with, Jake? Did my mother ever create a will or any other estate planning documents with your assistance? Bob's eyebrows rose noticeably, and I could see genuine surprise in his expression. She most certainly did. About 18 months ago, in fact. She came to me with very detailed and specific instructions about exactly how she wanted her affairs handled after her death. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. There actually is a will? A real legal will? Absolutely, without question. I prepared it myself, personally oversaw every detail of its creation, and it's a comprehensive document that covers all aspects of her estate. In fact, I've been wondering for the past few weeks when you or your sister would contact me about it. Usually families are in touch within just a few days of the funeral to begin the probate process and discuss the next steps. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet, like everything I thought I understood about the situation was crumbling. My sister Sarah told me repeatedly that there was no will. She claimed she'd searched everywhere in the house, every drawer, every closet, every possible hiding place, and couldn't find any legal documents related to estate planning. Bob's expression grew deeply concerned, and I could see worry lines forming on his forehead. That's highly unusual and quite troubling, Jake. Your mother took a copy of the will with her when she left here after our final meeting, and I have the original document locked securely in my office safe. As I recall very clearly, she was quite adamant and explicit about making sure both of her children knew about the will's existence and understood its contents. Can you tell me what the will says? What are the basic provisions? Bob opened a filing cabinet with a key from his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder labeled with Mom's name. Well, the specific details and exact provisions are confidential until we have a formal reading with all beneficiaries present, but I can certainly tell you some general information. Most importantly, you are specifically named as the sole executor of the estate, which means you have the legal authority and responsibility to manage all aspects of the probate process. I was completely speechless for several long moments. I'm the executor? Are you absolutely certain about that? Yes. Completely certain. Your mother was very clear and decisive about that choice, and she explained her reasoning in detail. She told me that you had demonstrated better judgment in business and financial matters, and that she trusted your decision-making abilities completely. She also mentioned that she felt you would be more objective and fair in handling family disputes that might arise. Bob paused, studying my face carefully. Jake, I need to ask you something important. And please understand that I'm asking as your mother's attorney and advocate, not to cause problems within your family. Has your sister been making any decisions about the estate? Has she been selling property, distributing assets, or taking any actions related to your mother's possessions or financial accounts? The memory of the real estate agent's phone call came flooding back, along with all the suspicions and concerns that had been building in my mind. She's been talking to real estate agents about selling the house, even though we haven't made any joint decision about that. And some of Mom's jewelry has gone missing. When I asked her about specific pieces, she gave me vague explanations that didn't make sense. Bob's face grew very grave, and I could see the concern deepening in his eyes. I see. This is potentially a very serious legal matter, Jake. In that case, I think we need to schedule a formal reading of the will as soon as possible, ideally within the next day or two. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.? Yes, absolutely. But what about Sarah? Shouldn't she be present for this as well? She absolutely should be there. It's important that all beneficiaries hear the will's provisions together. Can you contact her and ask her to attend? I think it would be better coming from you rather than from my office. I agreed, though I was already dreading making that phone call and dealing with Sarah's reaction. When I called Sarah that afternoon, from my apartment, her reaction was immediate, explosive, and more intense than I had anticipated. "What do you mean there's a will?" she shouted into the phone, her voice so loud that I had to hold the receiver away from my ear. "I searched everywhere, Jake. I spent hours going through every single drawer, every closet, every possible hiding place in that house. I checked Mom's desk multiple times. I went through her bedroom systematically. I even searched the basement and the attic. There was nothing." "Mr. Kellerman has the original document, Sarah. According to him, Mom created it 18 months ago with very specific instructions about how she wanted her estate handled." There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah finally spoke again, her voice had changed completely. It was now controlled and calculating in a way that sent chills down my spine. 18 months ago? That was right after her first cancer scare, when she was getting those preliminary test results that turned out to be false alarms. She wasn't thinking clearly then, Jake. She was absolutely terrified and making rash emotional decisions based on fear rather than logic. The doctors had her on anxiety medication and she was barely sleeping. Sarah, she was in complete remission by then. The doctors said the treatment was entirely successful and she was back to her normal routine. She was thinking perfectly, clearly. "We'll see about that," Sarah replied, and I could hear the steel in her voice. "What time is this supposed meeting tomorrow that you've arranged without consulting me?" 10 a.m. at Mr. Kellerman's office in Cleveland Heights. "Fine, I'll be there. But Jake, I want you to know that I deeply resent the implication that I've been dishonest about anything. I've been trying my best to handle an incredibly difficult situation, and you're making it much harder by being suspicious and paranoid about everything I do." But even as she said those words, I could hear something new in her voice that I'd never heard before. A kind of desperation and fear that made my stomach churn with worry. That evening, as darkness fell over Cleveland, and the streetlights began to flicker on throughout the neighborhood, I made a decision that would prove to be crucial. I drove to Mom's house on Elmwood Avenue, determined to conduct my own thorough search. I had a key, and I needed to look for myself with fresh eyes and a clear mind. If there had been a will kept in the house, maybe I could figure out what had happened to it, or find some clue about where else Mom might have stored important documents. The house felt completely different at night than it did during the day. Shadows seemed deeper and more mysterious, and every small creak of the old floorboard sounded amplified and somehow ominous in the silence. The familiar rooms that had been so full of life and warmth during my childhood now felt empty and sad, like a museum dedicated to a family that no longer existed. I started my search in Mom's bedroom, going through her antique desk drawer by drawer, methodically examining every piece of paper, every document, every scrap of writing that might provide a clue. In the bottom drawer, hidden behind a thick stack of old Christmas cards that she'd saved for sentimental reasons, I found something that made my blood run cold and confirmed my worst suspicions about what Sarah had been doing. It was a receipt from Jameson Jewelers, a well-known jewelry store in downtown Cleveland, dated just 3 days after Mom's funeral. The description was brief, but damning. Pearl necklace, vintage, excellent condition, sold for cash, $1,200. $200. Sarah had actually sold Mom's precious pearl necklace, the same necklace she'd claimed was worthless and damaged, the one she'd told me she was keeping somewhere safe for us to examine later, when we had time to make decisions about Mom's jewelry collection. I continued searching with a growing sense of dread and discovered even more receipts hidden in various places throughout the room. A gold tennis bracelet that Dad had given Mom for their 20th wedding anniversary had been sold to Miller & Sons Fine Jewelry for $800. A set of diamond earrings that had belonged to Mom's grandmother had been sold to a pawn shop on the east side for $650. A vintage Omega watch that had been a retirement gift from her real estate colleagues had been sold for $450. In total, Sarah had sold nearly $4,000 worth of Mom's most precious and sentimental jewelry in the week immediately following the funeral, while lying to my face about their whereabouts and value. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery of the evening. In Mom's small home office, where she'd managed the financial aspects of Chen's kitchen and handled her personal correspondence, I found something that made all the pieces of the puzzle suddenly click into place. Mom had a long-standing habit of writing herself reminder notes on small pieces of paper and sticking them to her computer monitor with tape. Most of them were completely mundane and ordinary. Call plumber about kitchen sink leak. Emma's piano recital Tuesday at 7 p.m. Order flowers for Mrs. Patterson's 85th birthday party next week. But one note, written in Mom's careful, precise handwriting that I would have recognized anywhere, said something that changed everything. Copy of will in safety deposit box at First National Bank, box 247. Jake is authorized user. A safety deposit box. It had never even occurred to me to look for a safety deposit box, and clearly Sarah had either missed this note entirely or had chosen to ignore it. This could be the breakthrough I needed to understand what had really happened to the will that Sarah claimed didn't exist. The next morning, I arrived at Bob Kellerman's office 15 minutes early. Sarah was already there, sitting in the waiting room with her arms crossed and her jaw set in a hard line. She looked like she was preparing for battle. "Good morning, Sarah," I said as I sat down across from her. She nodded curtly, but didn't speak. When Bob called us into his office, the atmosphere was tense enough to cut with a knife. He had the will laid out on his desk, along with several other documents. "Before we begin," Bob said, "I want to make sure you both understand that this is a legal document that represents your mother's final wishes. Regardless of any disagreements you might have, these wishes must be respected and followed." Sarah shifted in her chair. "Of course. We just want to know what Mom wanted." Bob picked up the will and cleared his throat. "The last will and testament of Margaret Chen, dated March 15th of last year. I, Margaret Chen, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my final will and testament." He continued reading, and with each paragraph, I watched Sarah's face grow paler. The will was detailed and specific. Mom had left the house to both Sarah and me, but with the stipulation that I would have the right of first refusal if either of us wanted to sell. The catering business was left entirely to me, along with all its equipment, client lists, and business relationships. But the biggest surprise was the cash. Mom had been much more financially secure than any of us had realized. Between her savings, investments, and life insurance policies, the estate was worth nearly $400,000. The will specified that $50,000 should go to each of Sarah's children for their college funds, $50,000 should go to my daughter Emma for the same purpose, and the remaining $250,000 should be split between Sarah and me. But there was one crucial detail that changed everything. "It says here that I'm named as the executor," I said, looking at Sarah. "The will specifically states that I'm responsible for managing the estate and ensuring that all assets are properly distributed." Sarah's face had gone completely white. "That's impossible. Jake doesn't know anything about managing estates. Mom would have chosen me. I'm the older one. I'm better with financial matters." Bob looked at her gently. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but your mother was very clear about this choice. She said that Jake had shown better judgment in business decisions and that she trusted him to handle the estate fairly." "This is ridiculous," Sarah snapped. "Mom wasn't thinking clearly when she made this will. She was scared about the cancer. She was on medication. She wasn't competent to make these kinds of decisions." "Actually," Bob said, "your mother specifically anticipated that concern. She included a clause stating that she was of sound mind and not under the influence of any medication when she made these decisions. She also had her mental competency evaluated by her physician and a psychiatrist, both of whom signed statements, confirming her capacity to make legal decisions." Sarah stood up abruptly. "I don't accept this. This will is invalid, and I'm going to contest it." That's your right, Bob said calmly. But I should warn you that contesting a will is expensive and time-consuming, and the evidence of your mother's competency is quite strong. Sarah grabbed her purse and headed for the door. We'll see about that. After she left, Bob looked at me with concern. Jake, I have to ask, has your sister been handling any of the estate assets? I told him about the jewelry receipts I'd found, about the real estate agent, about the safety deposit box note I'd discovered. Bob's expression grew very serious. If she's been selling estate assets without proper authority, that's a serious legal matter. As the executor, you need to take control of all estate assets immediately. Do you have access to your mother's safety deposit box? I don't think so. Don't you need a special key? Your mother listed you as an authorized user on the box. You should be able to access it with proper identification and a copy of the death certificate. 2 hours later, I was standing in First National Bank with a customer service representative, holding my breath as she opened safety deposit box 247. Inside was a manila envelope labeled "For Jake" in Mom's handwriting. When I opened it, I found a copy of the will. But that wasn't all. There was also a letter, written in Mom's familiar script. My dear Jake, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I hope you've found Mr. Kellerman and learned about the will. I'm writing this because I'm worried about what might happen after I'm gone. I love both of my children equally, but I've made you the executor because I trust your judgment and your integrity. Sarah has many wonderful qualities, but she's always struggled with money, and I'm concerned about how she might handle the responsibilities of managing the estate. I need you to know that I've been worried about Sarah's financial situation. Mike's business has been struggling for the past year, and they've been living beyond their means. Sarah has asked me for money several times, and while I've helped when I could, I'm concerned that she might see my estate as a solution to their problems. Please, be fair to your sister, but also be firm. The business should go to you because you understand it and you care about it. Sarah has never shown any interest in Chen's Kitchen, and I don't want it to be sold or neglected. Most importantly, I want you to know that I made these decisions carefully and with full knowledge of what I was doing. I consulted with my doctor, my attorney, and even spoke with a financial advisor to make sure I was making the right choices. Take care of each other, my son. Family is the most important thing, but sometimes protecting family means making difficult decisions. All my love, Mom. I sat in the bank's private room and read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. Mom had known. She'd known that Sarah was in financial trouble, and she'd known that there might be problems after her death. When I got home, I found 17 missed calls from Sarah. I called her back, and she answered on the first ring. Jake, we need to talk. Can you come over to my house? I'm pretty busy right now, Sarah. I need to start handling the estate business. Please, Jake, just give me an hour. There are things I need to explain. Something in her voice made me agree. Maybe she was ready to tell me the truth. But when I arrived at Sarah's house in Parma, I realized that the truth was going to be much worse than I'd imagined. Sarah's house was a modest 2-story colonial in a well-maintained neighborhood, but as I walked up the front steps, I noticed things I'd somehow missed before. The paint on the shutters was peeling, the lawn needed attention, and there was a stack of mail overflowing from the mailbox. These weren't the kinds of details that Sarah, with her perfectionist tendencies, would normally let slide. Mike answered the door, and he looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt that looked like he'd slept in it. Hey, Jake, he said quietly. Sarah's in the kitchen. She's pretty upset. I found Sarah sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers and envelopes. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup. For the first time since Mom's funeral, she looked genuinely vulnerable. Sit down, she said without looking up. Please. I sat across from her, noting that the papers scattered across the table appeared to be bills. Lots. Of them. You want to know the truth? She said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The truth is that I'm drowning, Jake. We're drowning. She gestured to the papers. Mike's construction business went under 6 months ago. The economy, the competition, a couple of big clients who didn't pay. It all came crashing down at once. We've been living on credit cards and borrowed money, trying to keep up appearances, trying to keep the kids from knowing how bad things are. I looked at the bills more closely. Credit card statements with balances in the thousands. A notice of default on their mortgage. Overdue notices from utility companies. When Mom got sick, Sarah continued, I started thinking about the inheritance. I thought maybe there would be enough to get us back on our feet, pay off the worst of the debts, give us a fresh start. So you knew about the will? She nodded, tears starting to flow. I found it about a month after the funeral. I was looking through Mom's papers, trying to find financial information, and I found her copy hidden in the back of her filing cabinet. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. You lied to me. You looked me in the eye and lied to me for weeks. I know, and I'm sorry. But Jake, when I read that will, I panicked. You got the business. You got to be the executor. You got control of everything. I was going to get some money, but not enough to save us. Not enough to keep us from losing the house. So you decided to steal from the estate? Sarah flinched. I didn't think of it as stealing. I thought of it as taking what I needed to survive. The jewelry, the house. Mom would have wanted to help us if she'd known how bad things were. Mom did know, I said quietly. She left me a letter. She knew about your financial problems, and she made her decisions anyway. Sarah's face crumpled. She knew? She knew, and she was trying to protect the family legacy. The business, the house, the money she'd worked so hard to save. She didn't want it all to disappear into your debt. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then Sarah looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, desperate, calculating. Jake, I need you to help me. We're family. We've been through everything together. I made mistakes, but I can fix them. If you let me be co-executor, if we work together on this, I can pay back what I took from the jewelry sales. We can make this work. I thought about Mom's letter, about her trust in my judgment, about the responsibility she'd placed on my shoulders. I can't do that, Sarah. Mom made her choices for good reasons, and I have to respect them. Sarah's expression hardened. Then you're forcing me to fight you. I'll contest the will. I'll claim Mom was incompetent when she made it. I'll tie up the estate in court for years if I have to. Sarah, don't do this. You'll just be throwing away money on legal fees, money you don't have. She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. I don't have a choice, Jake. I'm going to lose everything anyway. At least this way, I have a chance. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the law firm of Morrison, Blake & Associates. Sarah had hired an attorney and was formally contesting the will on grounds of mental incompetency and undue influence. I called Bob Kellerman immediately. I expected this might happen, he said when I explained the situation. Sarah's attorney, Patricia Morrison, has a reputation for taking on difficult cases. She's aggressive, but she's also smart enough to know when a case can't be won. What does this mean for the estate? It means everything is frozen until the case is resolved. No assets can be distributed, no property can be sold, no business decisions can be made. It could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to resolve, depending on how far Sarah wants to push it. And in the meantime, you'll need to preserve all estate assets and prepare for a legal battle. Do you have an attorney? I didn't. But Bob recommended someone. Jennifer Walsh, a probate litigation specialist with 20 years of experience. When I met Jennifer at her downtown office, I was impressed immediately. She was in her 40s, sharply dressed, and had the kind of no-nonsense manner that suggested she didn't waste time on small talk. "I've reviewed the will and the contest filing," she said, cutting straight to the point. "Your sister's case is weak. The evidence of your mother's mental competency is overwhelming, and there's no evidence of undue influence. But that doesn't mean this will be easy or quick." "What's the worst-case scenario?" "The worst case is that your sister drags this out for as long as possible, costing both sides enormous legal fees and keeping the estate tied up indefinitely. The best case is that we can convince her attorney that the case is unwinnable and negotiate a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" Jennifer leaned back in her chair. "That depends on what your sister really wants. If she's looking for more money from the estate, there may be room to negotiate. If she's trying to gain control of the estate, that's not negotiable. The will is clear." 2 weeks later, we had our first court hearing. The Cuyahoga County Probate Court was an imposing building downtown, with marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo. I arrived early and sat in the hallway, watching lawyers and families hurry past with their files and worried expressions. Sarah arrived with her attorney, Patricia Morrison, who was exactly what I'd expected. Tall, blonde, wearing an expensive suit and carrying herself with the kind of confidence that comes from winning difficult cases. Sarah barely looked at me as they passed, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she clutched her purse like a lifeline. The hearing was brief and procedural. Judge Harrison, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes, listened to both sides present their basic arguments, then scheduled a series of discovery deadlines and depositions. "This case will be decided on the evidence," she said firmly. "I want both sides to be thorough in their preparation, because I don't intend to rehear arguments that should have been made the first time." As we left the courthouse, Jennifer pulled me aside. "The good news is that Judge Harrison is fair and thorough. She won't be swayed by emotional arguments or legal theatrics. She'll focus on the facts. And the bad news? The bad news is that your sister's attorney is going to make this as difficult as possible. She's going to demand extensive discovery, take depositions from everyone who knew your mother, and try to find any evidence that might support their case." She was right. Over the next 3 months, the legal process consumed my life. I had to provide financial records, medical records, and detailed documentation of every interaction I'd had with Mom in the months before her death. I was deposed for 8 hours, answering questions about Mom's mental state, her relationship with Sarah, and the circumstances surrounding the creation of the will. The most difficult part was watching the case tear apart what was left of my relationship with Sarah. We were no longer speaking directly. All communication went through our attorneys. At family gatherings for the kids' birthdays or school events, we were polite but distant, like acquaintances rather than siblings who had grown up together. The depositions were brutal. Sarah's attorney questioned Mom's doctor, her neighbors, her friends from church, and even the staff at Chen's Kitchen. They were looking for any evidence that Mom had been confused, forgetful, or susceptible to influence. But the testimony consistently supported Mom's mental competency. Dr. Patterson, her longtime physician, testified that Mom had been sharp and clear-thinking right up until her final illness. Mrs. Henderson, our neighbor, said Mom had been as organized and detail-oriented as ever. The staff at the catering business said she'd been actively involved in day-to-day operations until just a few weeks before her death. The turning point came when Patricia Morrison deposed Mom's psychiatrist, Dr. Rebecca Santos, who had evaluated Mom's mental state before the will was created. "In your professional opinion," Morrison asked, "was Margaret Chen competent to make complex legal and financial decisions in March of last year?" Dr. Santos was unequivocal. "Absolutely. I administered a comprehensive mental status examination, including tests for memory, reasoning, and decision-making capacity. Mrs. Chen scored in the 95th percentile for her age group. She was not only competent, she was exceptionally sharp for someone her age. But she had recently been treated for cancer," Morrison pressed. "Wasn't she under significant emotional stress?" Of course she was concerned about her health, as any reasonable person would be. but her cancer treatment had been successful, and she was in remission. More importantly, she demonstrated clear, logical thinking about her family's future. She discussed her concerns about her daughter's financial management and her confidence in her son's business judgment. These weren't the confused ramblings of someone under duress. They were the thoughtful considerations of a mother who wanted to protect her family's legacy. I watched Sarah's face during this testimony, and I saw the moment she realized her case was falling apart. Her shoulders sagged, and she whispered something to her attorney that made Morrison's jaw tighten. After the deposition, Jennifer and I walked to a coffee shop near the courthouse. "That was the nail in the coffin," Jennifer said, stirring her latte. "Morrison knows her case is dead in the water now. I expect we'll be hearing about settlement discussions soon." She was right. 2 days later, Morrison called Jennifer to discuss a possible resolution. "What are they proposing?" I asked during our phone conference. "They want to drop the competency challenge in exchange for a larger share of the monetary inheritance," Jennifer explained. "Instead of the 50-50 split specified in the will, they want a 60-40 split in Sarah's favor." "Absolutely not," I said immediately. "Mom was very specific about how she wanted things divided." "I understand your position, but consider this. If we go to trial, you'll spend at least another $20,000 in legal fees, possibly more. The settlement would cost less than continuing to fight. It's not about the money. It's about respecting Mom's wishes." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Jake, I have to ask. Do you think there's any chance of reconciling with your sister after this is over?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected. "I don't know. Maybe if she'd been honest from the beginning. But she lied to me for months. She stole from the estate, and now she's trying to overturn Mom's explicit wishes. I don't know how we come back from that." "Then you should know that taking this to trial will make reconciliation much more difficult. Trials are public, and the things that come out in testimony can't be taken back." I thought about it for 2 days. Finally, I called Jennifer back. "Tell Morrison we'll accept a compromise, but not the one they proposed. We'll stick to the will's 50-50 split of the cash inheritance, but I'll cover all of Sarah's legal fees out of my share. That saves her about $15,000, which should help with her financial situation, but it doesn't violate Mom's wishes." Jennifer made the call, and Morrison accepted immediately, so quickly that I realized Sarah's financial situation must have been even worse than I'd thought. The settlement conference was held in a windowless conference room at the courthouse. Sarah and I sat on opposite sides of a long table with our attorneys between us, while a court mediator walked us through the final agreement. Sarah looked exhausted. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. When she signed the settlement papers, her hand was shaking. After the formalities were complete, the attorneys and mediator left us alone for a few minutes. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I want you to know that I never wanted it to come to this." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I know. I'm sorry, Jake. I'm sorry for all of it. Are you going to be okay? Financially, I mean?" She nodded slowly. "Mike found a job with another construction company. It's not much, but it's steady. And with my share of the inheritance, we can pay off the worst of the debts and maybe save the house. What about us? Is there any way we can get past this?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. I hope so. But I understand if you can't. Forgive me. I lied to you. I stole from Mom's estate. I put you through all this stress and expense. I don't know how to make that right. Maybe we can start by being honest with each other from now on." She nodded. "I'd like that." But as we left the courthouse that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had been broken between us, something that might never be fully repaired. 3 months after the settlement, I was finally able to begin the process of properly administering Mom's estate. The legal battle had been emotionally draining, but it had also taught me things about my family that I'd never known, and about myself. I was sitting in the office at Chen's kitchen, going through Mom's business records and trying to understand the full scope of what she'd built, when I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. It was a manila folder tucked behind the filing cabinet, labeled simply Sarah. Inside were bank statements, loan documents, and a series of letters that told a story I'd never heard. The first document was a bank statement from 18 months ago, showing a wire transfer of $25,000 from Mom's personal account to Sarah and Mike's joint account. The memo line read, "Emergency loan, to be repaid." The second document was another bank statement from a year ago, showing another transfer of $15,000 with the same memo notation. But it was the letters that really told the story. They were copies of letters Mom had written to Sarah, stored in chronological order. The first was dated 2 years ago. "My dear Sarah, I understand that Mike's business is going through a difficult time, and I'm happy to help however I can. The $25,000 should help you catch up on your mortgage payments and give you some breathing room. However, I need you to understand that this is a loan, not a gift. I expect it to be repaid when Mike's business recovers. More importantly, I need you to be honest with me about your financial situation. I can't help you make good decisions if you're not telling me the truth about what's happening. I love you and want to support you, but I also need you to take responsibility for your choices. Love, Mom." The next letter was dated 6 months later. "Sarah, I'm disappointed that you haven't made any payments on the loan I gave you, especially since you just bought a new car and took that expensive vacation to Florida. When I asked you about the loan repayment, you told me that Mike's business was still struggling, but your Facebook posts suggest otherwise. I'm willing to help you again with the $15,000 you've requested, but this time I need a formal repayment plan. I also think you and Mike should consider financial counseling. Your spending patterns concern me. Love, Mom." The final letter was dated just 4 months before Mom's death. "Sarah, I've decided not to give you the additional $30,000 you've requested. You haven't made any effort to repay the previous loans, and you haven't followed through on the financial counseling I suggested. More troubling, I've learned that you told Mike the previous money was gifts from me, not loans. This dishonesty is unacceptable. I love you, but I can't continue to enable financial irresponsibility. I hope you'll understand that my decision to make Jake the executor of my estate stems from these concerns. I trust him to manage money responsibly and to make decisions that protect the family's long-term interests. I hope someday you'll forgive me for what might seem like favoritism, but I believe this is the best way to ensure that the money I've worked so hard to save will actually benefit my grandchildren and preserve what I've built. Love, Mom." I sat in that office for a long time, staring at those letters and trying to process what they meant. Mom hadn't just known about Sarah's financial problems. She'd been dealing with them directly for years. She'd loaned Sarah $40,000 that was never repaid, and Sarah had lied about the nature of those transactions to her own husband. But there was something else in the folder that shocked me even more. It was a handwritten note from Mom, dated just 3 weeks before her death. "Jake, if something happens to me, you need to know that Sarah owes the estate $40,000 in unpaid loans. I've documented everything, but I never had the heart to pursue legal action. She's my daughter, and I kept hoping she would do the right thing on her own. The estate is smaller than it appears because of this debt. Use your judgment about whether to pursue repayment. Mom." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The estate wasn't worth $400,000. It was worth $360,000 because Sarah owed $40,000 that she'd never disclosed during the settlement negotiations. I called Jennifer Walsh. "Immediately. This changes everything," she said after I explained what I'd found. Sarah had a legal obligation to disclose this debt during the estate proceedings. The fact that she didn't constitutes fraud. What are my options? You could reopen the case and pursue the debt. You'd almost certainly win, and Sarah would owe the estate the full $40,000 plus interest and legal fees. Or you could treat it as a forgiven debt and reduce her inheritance accordingly. What would you recommend? Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Legally, you have a strong case. Morally, that's a decision you'll have to make based on your relationship with your sister and what you think your mother would have wanted. I thought about Mom's note. Use your judgment. She'd left the decision up to me, knowing that I'd have to weigh legal rights against family relationships. I decided to confront Sarah directly. When I called her and asked to meet, she agreed immediately. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Cleveland that neither of us frequented. Sarah looked better than she had during the legal proceedings. She'd put on some weight, and there was more color in her face. She seemed calmer, more like the sister I remembered from before all of this started. "How are things going?" I asked as we sat down with our drinks. "Better," she said. "Mike's job is working out well, and we've been able to pay off most of the credit card debt. The inheritance helped a lot. We were able to keep the house and get back on our feet." "I'm glad to hear that." I paused, trying to figure out how to bring up what I'd discovered. "Sarah, I found something at Mom's office that I need to talk to you about." Her expression immediately became guarded. "What kind of something?" I pulled out copies of the letters and bank statements and placed them on the table between us. Sarah's face went white as she recognized what they were. "You knew Mom had loaned you $40,000, I said quietly. "You knew it was supposed to be repaid, and you knew it should have been disclosed as a debt of the estate." Sarah stared at the papers for a long time before looking up at me. "Yes, I knew." "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell your attorney?" Tears started flowing down Sarah's cheeks. "Because I was ashamed. Because I knew that if the debt came out, I'd have to pay it back, and we didn't have the money. Because I knew it would make me look even worse than I already did." "Sarah, this is fraud. You could go to jail for this." "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I've been terrified every day since the settlement that you'd find out. I've barely been able to sleep." I looked at this woman who had been my sister, my playmate, my confidant for most of my life, and I felt a mixture of anger, disappointment, and sadness that was almost overwhelming. "What am I supposed to do with this?" I asked. "I don't know. Whatever you think is right. What I think is right is for you to take responsibility for your actions. All of them." Sarah nodded. "You're right. What do you want me to do?" I'd been thinking about this conversation for days, and I'd finally come to a decision that I hoped would honor both Mom's wishes and the relationship Sarah and I had once shared. "I want you to pay back the $40,000, not all at once. I know you can't afford that. But I want a formal repayment plan with interest. I want you to acknowledge the debt in writing. And I want you to go to financial counseling, like Mom suggested." Sarah looked surprised. "You're not going to take me back to court?" "Not if you do what I'm asking. But Sarah, this is your last chance. If you lie to me again, if you try to avoid your responsibilities again, I will pursue every legal remedy available. Do you understand?" She nodded. "I understand. And Jake, thank you for giving me another chance." "Don't thank me yet. You have to follow through." We worked out the details over the next week. Sarah would pay $500 per month toward the debt, which would take about 7 years to fully repay with interest. She would attend financial counseling sessions with a certified counselor. And she would sign a formal acknowledgement of the debt that could be enforced in court if necessary. More importantly, we agreed to start rebuilding our relationship slowly. We began having monthly dinners together, just the two of us, where we could talk openly about what had happened and how we could move forward. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I was so angry about the lies and betrayal that I wanted to walk away from the whole situation. There were times when Sarah became defensive and we had to take breaks from our conversations to cool down. But gradually, something began to heal between us. At one of our dinners, about 6 months after the settlement, Sarah brought up something that had been bothering her. "Jake, I need to tell you something that might be hard to hear." I braced myself for another revelation. When I was going through Mom's things after the funeral, I found a journal she'd been keeping. I only read a little bit of it, but there was an entry about you that I think you should know about. She handed me a small leather-bound book that I recognized as one Mom had carried in her purse. "What does it say?" She wrote about how proud she was of the way you'd handled your divorce, how you'd put Emma's needs first even when it cost you financially. She wrote about how you'd helped her with the business without ever asking for anything in return. She said that watching you become a father had shown her what kind of man you really were. I opened the journal to the page Sarah had marked. In Mom's careful handwriting, I read, "Jake has become the man I always hoped he would be. He has integrity, compassion, and strength of character. I know I made the right choice in trusting him with the family's future. I just hope Sarah will understand someday that my decision wasn't about loving one child more than the other. It was about recognizing each child's strengths and putting them in positions where they could succeed." I had to stop reading because my eyes were filling with tears. "She loved us both," Sarah said quietly, "but she saw us clearly, maybe more clearly than we saw ourselves." "Yeah, she did. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what she was trying to do. I'm sorry it took a lawsuit for us to start being honest with each other." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two siblings who had been through hell together and somehow found their way back to something resembling a relationship. A year later, I was running Chen's Kitchen successfully, having expanded the catering business to include a small cafe that served Mom's recipes to a growing list of regular customers. Sarah was making her monthly payments on the debt and had completed her financial counseling program. Her marriage was stronger, and she'd found a part-time job that she enjoyed. We weren't as close as we'd been before Mom's death, but we were family again. We celebrated holidays together, our kids played together, and we'd learned to talk openly about problems before they became crises. The most important lesson I learned from the whole ordeal was something Mom had tried to teach us both. That love sometimes means making difficult decisions, that fairness isn't always the same as equality, and that protecting the people you care about sometimes requires saying no to them. On the first anniversary of Mom's death, Sarah and I visited her grave. Together, we brought flowers from her favorite garden center and spent an hour telling her about everything that had happened. The legal battle, the settlement, the debt repayment plan, and the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. "Do you think she would be proud of how we handled everything?" Sarah asked as we were getting ready to leave. I thought about the question seriously. I think she'd be proud that we found our way back to each other. I think she'd be happy that the business is thriving and that you're taking responsibility for your debts. And I think she'd be relieved that her grandchildren still have aunts and uncles who love them. Even after everything that happened, especially after everything that happened, it would have been easy to let this destroy our family. The fact that we didn't, the fact that we chose to do the hard work of rebuilding trust, I think that's exactly what she would have wanted. As we drove away from the cemetery, I realized that Mom's final gift to us hadn't been the inheritance or the business or even the house. It had been the lesson that families are worth fighting for. Not in court, but in the much harder arena of daily forgiveness, honest communication, and shared responsibility. The will had been about more than money. It had been about understanding who we really were, what we were capable of, and what we owed to each other and to the people who would come after us. And in the end, that lesson was worth more than any inheritance could have been.